The room went silent after Damon Hollander finished speaking. Roland Everly did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He simply looked at the folder on the hospital table and slowly closed it. Zola Everly watched her husband realize, almost immediately, that the words he had chosen had changed the way her father saw him. Damon had entered that room believing he was protecting the people he loved. He had believed preparation was a form of care. He had believed solving problems before they became emergencies was the reason people trusted him. He had not expected one sentence to create a distance that money, planning, or explanations could not quickly remove. But 2 days earlier, before that silence existed between them, Zola had still believed her family could handle whatever came next. Roland Everly was recovering in the hospital, and everyone around him believed they were helping in the best way they knew. Zola had spent most of her life becoming the person others relied on. She remembered appointments, organized details, and noticed small problems before they became larger ones. When her father was admitted to the hospital, those instincts became stronger. She arrived early, stayed late, and tried to make sure nothing was missed. On the second morning of Roland's stay, she sat beside his bed while he reviewed the information the medical team had given him. He held his glasses in one hand and looked over the notes carefully. "You do not have to read everything before I do," Roland said with a gentle smile. Zola looked up. "I know." Roland raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" She laughed quietly because she knew he had a point. "I'm trying to make sure you are okay." Roland did. "I know you are." He looked around the room at the small things she had arranged. His book was beside the chair. His phone charger was placed where he could reach it. His jacket was folded neatly on the other side of the room. Every detail showed how much she cared. But Roland also noticed something else. "Sometimes helping someone means trusting them enough to let them choose," he said. Zola looked at him carefully. She understood the words, but she was not sure she understood them completely. Her whole life, love had meant stepping forward. It had meant carrying what other people could not carry. She had never considered that love could also mean stepping back. Later that morning, Damon arrived at the hospital after finishing a business meeting. He walked into the room with the same confidence he carried everywhere else. He was a man used to solving difficult problems. In his company, uncertainty was something to analyze, organize, and reduce. But this was not a business decision. This was Roland's life. "How are you feeling today?" Damon asked. Roland smiled. "Better than yesterday." Damon nodded. "That is good." Zola noticed that Damon looked relieved. He had been worried about her father, but he had also been worried about Zola. He had watched her spend years taking responsibility for everyone around her. He knew how much she loved her father. He also feared that love would eventually become exhaustion. "The doctor gave us some things to think about," Zola said. Damon sat down beside her. "Then we should make sure we understand every option." Roland looked at him. "Every option is useful." He paused. "As long as I am part of choosing one." Damon immediately nodded. "Of course." He meant it. At that moment, no one believed there was a problem. Damon respected Roland. Zola trusted Damon. Roland appreciated both of them. They were not fighting. They were simply approaching the same situation from different directions. Roland wanted support without losing independence. Zola wanted to protect her father without admitting how afraid she was of losing control. Damon wanted to protect the people he loved by making sure nothing unexpected happened. The difference between them was small at first. It appeared in simple moments. When Zola reached for a document before her father finished reading it. When Damon suggested a solution before anyone asked for one. When Roland politely reminded them that he was still capable of making decisions. None of those moments seemed important enough to create conflict. But Roland noticed them. He noticed the way people who loved him sometimes looked at his condition before looking at him. That afternoon, Roland spoke with the medical team and answered their questions himself. Zola stayed nearby, but allowed him to lead the conversation. Damon watched quietly. He respected the way Roland handled himself. He also felt something he could not completely explain. He knew Roland was capable. He knew Zola's father was not helpless. Yet the uncertainty of the future still bothered him. Before leaving that evening, Damon told Roland, "We will make sure you have everything you need." Roland smiled. "I appreciate that." Then he added, Just remember that what I need is not always the same as what others think I need." Damon nodded. He believed he understood. Zola believed she understood. But neither of them realized how difficult that difference would become. Because the hardest moments in families were not always created by people who stopped caring. Sometimes they were created by people who cared so much that they forgot to listen. After leaving the hospital the previous evening, Damon Hollander kept thinking about the way Zola Everly had looked beside her father's bed. She had smiled, answered every question, and insisted she was fine, but he had noticed the small signs that told him otherwise. She skipped meals, checked messages between conversations, and carried every detail as if letting something slip would create another problem for someone she loved. The next morning, Damon returned earlier than planned. He brought coffee for Zola and a folder with information he had gathered about transportation and possible support after Roland Everly left the hospital. "I thought this might save you some time," Damon said, placing the folder beside her. Zola looked through the pages and then back at him. "You already started working on this?" Damon nodded. "I wanted to make things easier." She appreciated the effort because she knew where it came from. Damon had always been the person who stepped forward when someone needed help. It was one of the reasons she trusted him. Roland watched quietly as Damon explained the options. The suggestions were practical, thoughtful, and carefully prepared. Damon asked about schedules, transportation, and ways to reduce stress after discharge. Roland listened and thanked him for taking the time to think ahead. "These are good ideas," Roland said. Damon smiled. "I just want everyone to feel prepared." Zola looked at the folder again. She knew Damon was trying to support her, but she also noticed that the conversation had already moved toward plans before Roland had shared what mattered most to him. "Maybe we should start by asking Dad what he wants his routine to look like," she said. Damon looked at her. "Of course. I just thought having options ready would make it easier." "I know," Zola replied. "I know you were trying to help." Damon was quiet for a moment. "Do you think I am overstepping?" Zola chose her words carefully. "I think you're trying to protect me. I just want to make sure we remember that he is part of the decision too." Damon glanced toward Roland. He understood the point, but he also worried about something else. He had watched Zola take responsibility for everyone around her, and he did not want her to reach a point where she had nothing left for herself. "I do not want you to feel like you have to carry everything alone," Damon said. "You have me." Zola nodded. "I know I do." The answer was warm, but the difference between them remained. Damon believed preparation could prevent pain. Zola believed listening had to come before planning. Roland noticed the difference, but did not interrupt. He asked Damon about one of the transportation options instead, giving him the chance to explain. Damon answered honestly, and Roland thanked him again. Their conversation stayed respectful. No one argued. No one accused anyone of doing the wrong thing. Later that afternoon, Damon stepped into the hallway to take a business call. He handled the conversation with the same confidence he brought to every challenge, making quick decisions and giving clear instructions. When he returned, he saw Roland and Zola talking about ordinary things from home. They discussed a favorite meal, a neighbor, and small plans Roland hoped to continue after leaving the hospital. Damon paused before walking back into the room. He cared about them both, but he was beginning to understand that helping someone did not always begin with an answer. Still, his instinct remained the same. When people he loved faced uncertainty, he believed someone needed to step forward. That belief stayed with him as the evening ended and the family prepared for another day. Roland Everly had spent most of his life being the person others could depend on. He had been the one friends called when they needed advice, the one family members trusted with difficult decisions, and the one who quietly showed up without expecting recognition. Sitting in the hospital room, he knew his daughter and son-in-law were trying to offer him that same kind of support. He appreciated it. He truly did. But he also noticed how quickly the people around him began adjusting their lives around his situation. On the third morning of his hospital stay, Roland woke before Zola Everly arrived. He sat near the window with a cup of water beside him and looked over the small items she had brought from home. A book he had been reading, his glasses, and a few personal belongings were arranged carefully on the table. Zola had always been thoughtful about details. She remembered things other people forgot. When she entered the room, She immediately checked whether he needed anything. "Good morning," she said. "How did you sleep?" Roland smiled. "Better than yesterday." Zola looked at him carefully. "Are you sure?" He laughed softly. "That question tells me you have asked yourself that same thing several times already." Zola smiled because she knew he was right. She sat beside him and listened as he talked about the night, the nurses who had checked on him, and the questions he wanted to ask during the next update. She did not interrupt. She let him finish. It was a small change, but Roland noticed. Later that morning, Damon Hollander joined them after reviewing his schedule. The three of them discussed practical matters together. Damon asked about transportation after discharge. Zola asked about what her father preferred, and Roland answered each question directly. The conversation remained calm because everyone believed they were doing the right thing. "I appreciate both of you being here," Roland said. "I know you're trying to make things easier." Damon nodded. "That is what we want." Roland looked at him. "I know." There was no disagreement in his voice. He respected Damon's intention. He also understood that good intentions could come from different places. During the conversation, Roland mentioned that there were parts of his normal routine he wanted to continue after leaving the hospital. He wanted to return to certain habits, see familiar people, and keep doing small things that made his days feel like his own. Zola listened carefully. She realized she had spent so much time thinking about what her father might need that she had not asked enough about what he wanted. "I should have asked you that sooner," she admitted. Roland reached for her hand. "You were worried about me." "I was," she said. "I still am." "I know." His answer was gentle. But worrying and listening are not always the same thing. The words stayed with her. Damon heard them too, but he did not respond immediately. He understood Roland's point, yet his concern for Zola remained. He had seen how much she cared, and he knew she would sacrifice anything for her father. In his mind, protecting Zola meant making sure she did not lose herself in the process. That afternoon, Roland had a quiet conversation with a member of the hospital staff about his next steps. Zola stayed nearby, but allowed him to speak for himself. She watched as her father asked questions, considered answers, and made choices about what felt right for him. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, she saw clearly that being needed was not the only way she could show love. As evening approached, the family prepared to leave for the night. Damon gathered the information he had collected. Zola placed her father's belongings within reach, and Roland looked around the room one more time. Everything seemed peaceful, yet each person carried a different understanding of what would happen next. Zola was learning to listen. Roland was preparing to protect his own voice. Damon was still searching for the best way to help the people he loved. None of them knew that the next difficult conversation would force those differences into the open. The fourth day of Roland Everly's hospital stay brought more conversations about what would happen after he returned home. The medical team continued monitoring his condition, and the family began thinking about practical details that would make the transition easier. Roland listened carefully, asked questions, and considered each option before giving his answer. Zola Everly noticed that she was beginning to change her own habits. She still wanted to step in whenever something felt uncertain, but she had started waiting before speaking for her father. Damon Hollander noticed the effort she was making, but he remained focused on one concern, making sure Zola did not become overwhelmed. That afternoon, Damon brought up the possibility of arranging additional support after Roland left the hospital. "I think we should prepare as much as we can now," he said. "It will be easier if we already know what needs to happen." Roland looked at him calmly. "Planning ahead can be helpful." Damon nodded, encouraged by the response. "Exactly," Roland continued, "but I would like to understand the plan before we decide it is the right one." Damon paused. Of course. He meant it. But Zola noticed the difference between them. Damon was already thinking about solutions. Roland was still thinking about choices. "Maybe we can start with what Dad feels comfortable with," Zola said. Damon looked at her. "That is what I want to." His answer was immediate, but the concern in his expression remained. "I just do not want you carrying everything until you are exhausted." Zola looked at him for a moment. She knew that was the reason behind everything he did. Damon was not trying to take control from her father. He was trying to protect the person he loved. "I know," she said, "but sometimes helping someone means letting them tell you what help looks like. Damon did not argue. He simply looked toward Roland, who was reviewing the information they had discussed earlier. Roland noticed the silence between them, but chose not to interrupt. Instead, he asked Damon a practical question about one of the options he had suggested. The conversation continued calmly. Damon explained his reasoning, Roland asked questions, and Zola listened to both sides. No one was angry. No one believed they were doing harm. The difficulty came from the fact that each person was trying to protect something different. Damon wanted to protect Zola from carrying too much. Zola wanted to protect her father's independence. Roland wanted to remain involved in decisions about his own life. Later that evening, Zola helped her father organize a few belongings before leaving. She noticed that he kept the same routines he had always valued, even in a hospital room. His book was placed beside his chair, his glasses were kept within reach, and his notes were arranged exactly the way he liked them. Small details, but they reminded her that her father's life was not defined by the reason he was in the hospital. Damon joined them before they left. "I will keep looking at options," he said. "Roland did." "Thank you." The answer was sincere, but there was a quiet difference in what they each meant. Damon was thinking about preventing future problems. Roland was thinking about continuing his life with support when he needed it. As they walked through the hospital hallway, Zola realized the situation was becoming more complicated than she first believed. Everyone cared. Everyone was trying. Yet caring for someone did not always mean everyone understood the same thing. For now, the family remained together. But the next decision would test whether they could listen as carefully as they tried to help. The 5th day of Roland Everly's hospital stay began with a routine that felt almost normal. The family had adjusted to the rhythm of the hospital. Morning conversations with the medical team, short periods of rest, and quiet discussions about what would happen after Roland returned home. For Zola Everly, the biggest change was not something anyone else could see. She had started paying attention to the moments when she wanted to answer for her father and choosing to wait instead. Roland noticed. He did not mention it every time, but he appreciated the effort. That afternoon, the family met to discuss the practical steps that would need to happen after discharge. Damon Hollander arrived with a more organized version of the information he had gathered before. This time, he made an effort to begin with questions instead of solutions. "Before we talk about options, what matters most to you?" Damon asked Roland. Roland looked surprised for a moment, then smiled. "That is a better place to start." The conversation moved slowly. Roland explained the parts of his daily routine that gave him independence. He talked about the responsibilities he still wanted to handle himself and the things where he would accept assistance. Zola listened carefully, realizing that her father had been trying to communicate this from the beginning. Damon listened too, but he struggled with one concern he had not shared. He worried that practical limitations would eventually force difficult choices. "I understand what you want," Damon said. "I just want to make sure we are realistic about what will be easiest." Roland nodded. Being realistic matters. But sometimes the easiest choice is not always the best choice. Damon did not disagree. He respected Roland, and he knew the older man was speaking from experience. Still, he believed responsibility meant preparing for problems before they arrived. After the discussion, Zola walked with Damon down the hallway while Roland rested. "Thank you for trying," she said. Damon looked at her. "I feel like I keep trying to help, and somehow making things more complicated." Zola shook her head. "You are not making things worse. You just see the problem differently than Dad does." Damon looked back toward Roland's room. "I am afraid that if something becomes difficult later, you will be the one trying to handle everything." Zola understood the fear behind his words. She knew Damon had spent years protecting the people he loved by taking action. But she also knew there was a difference between supporting someone and deciding what they needed before they had a chance to say it. That evening, Roland asked Zola to bring him a few items from home. When she returned, he carefully placed them where he wanted them. It was a small task, but he handled it himself. Zola watched without stepping in. "You are letting me do things again," Roland said with a smile. She laughed softly. "I am trying." Roland nodded. "That matters." The moment was simple, but it showed how much had changed. Zola was learning that love did not disappear when she stopped controlling every detail. Roland was showing that accepting support did not mean giving up his own choices. Damon saw the exchange from across the room. He felt happy that they were finding balance, but he also felt the pressure of the situation building. He believed he was helping the family prepare. He did not realize that the next difficult moment would not come from a lack of planning. It would come from the way he chose to handle the pressure when everything became more complicated. The sixth day of Roland Everly's hospital stay began with a decision about the days ahead. The medical team had explained that his condition was improving, and the family needed to focus on what support would be practical after he returned home. Roland listened carefully during every conversation, asking questions before accepting suggestions. Zola Everly sat beside him, allowing him to speak first. She had learned that being present did not mean answering every question for him. Roland noticed the change, but he did not mention it until later. "You are giving me more room to talk," he said. Zola smiled. "I'm trying to. Hold on, did. That means more than you know." That afternoon, Damon Hollander arrived with new information. He had reviewed the options they discussed and wanted to make sure there was a clear path forward. "I spoke with a few people and found some ways we can make the transition easier," Damon said. Roland looked at him. "Thank you for taking the time." Damon placed the notes on the table. "I just want to make sure we do not wait until something becomes difficult." Zola glanced at the papers. She could see that Damon had tried to be more thoughtful. He was not presenting a solution before listening. He was trying to include everyone, but there was still a sense of urgency behind his actions. "Can we go through these together?" she asked. Damon nodded. "Of course." Roland reviewed the information slowly. He asked about timing, availability, and what each option would actually mean for his daily life. The discussion was calm, but Damon noticed that some of Roland's choices were not the ones he expected. Roland wanted support in certain areas, but he also wanted to keep responsibilities that made him feel independent. Damon respected the answer, but he struggled with it. "I understand why those things matter to you," Damon said. "I just want to be sure they will not become too difficult later." Roland looked at him. "That is a fair concern." He paused before continuing. "But difficulty does not always mean something should be taken away." The word stayed in the room for a moment. Damon did not argue. He knew Roland was speaking honestly. Still, he felt the weight of watching the people he loved face uncertainty. Later that day, Damon received an update related to a practical issue that needed attention after discharge. It was not an emergency, but it reminded him that plans could change quickly. He stepped into the hallway and handled the conversation efficiently. When he returned, he found Zola helping Roland review the information again. "Everything okay?" Zola asked. Damon nodded. "Yes. I just want to make sure we are ready." She looked at him. "Ready for what?" Damon hesitated. "For whatever comes next." Zola understood the fear behind the answer. Damon was not trying to control their family. He was trying to prevent a situation where someone would suffer because they had waited too long. But she also saw the danger in always preparing for the worst. Sometimes preparation could quietly become a reason to ignore what someone wanted in the present. That evening, Roland asked Damon a simple question. "When you make plans for people you care about, how do you decide when to stop?" Damon looked surprised. He had never considered the question that way. "I suppose I stop when I know they are safe." "Hold on, did. And how do you know that?" Damon did not answer immediately. For the first time, he realized that his definition of safety might not be the same as everyone else's. The conversation ended peacefully. No one raised their voice. No one walked away angry. But Damon left the hospital that night carrying the same belief he had arrived with. If he could prevent a problem before it happened, he believed he had a responsibility to do so. He did not yet understand that the next choice he made in the name of protection would be the one that changed how Zola saw him. The seventh day of Roland Everly's hospital stay began with Damon Hollander believing he had finally found the right balance. He had listened, he had asked questions, and he had tried to include Roland in every discussion. But as the possibility of discharge became closer, the pressure to make sure everything went smoothly started to return. That morning, Damon reviewed the information one more time before visiting the hospital. He wanted to avoid mistakes. He wanted to prevent stress. He wanted to make sure Zola Everly did not become responsible for every difficult decision after her father returned home. When he entered Roland's room, Zola was helping her father organize the notes from the previous conversations. Damon waited before speaking. "How are you feeling today?" he asked. Roland smiled. "Better." Damon nodded. "That is good to hear." For a moment, everything felt normal. Then Damon placed a folder on the table. "I made a few updates based on what we discussed." Roland looked at the folder, but did not reach for it immediately. "Updates to what?" Damon answered carefully. "The support plan after you leave." Zola looked at him. "We were going to review the options together." Damon nodded. "We are. I just want to make sure there was something clear to look at." Roland opened the folder and read through the information. The details were organized and practical. Damon had clearly spent time making sure nothing was overlooked. Roland appreciated the effort. "You have worked hard on this," he said. "I know you want to help." Damon gave a small smile. "Edo." Roland continued reading. "But some of these choices seem to assume what I will need." Damon looked confused. "I thought we discussed these concerns." "We discussed concerns," Roland replied. "That is different from deciding the answer." The room became quiet. Damon looked at Zola, hoping she would explain that he was only trying to make things easier. Instead, she stayed silent. She wanted him to understand Roland's point for himself. Damon took a breath. "I'm not trying to take your choices away." Roland did. "I know." His calm response made the moment harder, not easier. But sometimes people can feel replaced even when everyone around them believes they are being protected. Damon looked down at the folder. He understood the words, but he also felt the fear behind his own actions. He had seen people delay important decisions because they were afraid of admitting change was coming. He did not want that for Roland. He did not want that for Zola. Later that afternoon, after Roland spoke with the medical team about his progress, Damon stayed behind to discuss a practical concern related to the transition home. The conversation was ordinary. There was no emergency. No one was in danger. But Damon focused on making sure every possibility was covered. Zola noticed. "Damon," she said quietly, "can we slow down for a moment?" He looked at her. "I'm trying to make sure we do not regret waiting." She understood his fear. "I know, but what if we regret not asking first?" Damon did not answer immediately. That question stayed with him. That evening, the family prepared to leave the hospital. Roland thanked Damon for his effort. Zola thanked him too. There was still affection between them. There was still trust. But Damon felt the distance that had been growing between what he intended and what they experienced. He left the hospital believing he had more work to do. He believed the answer was to prepare better, organize better, and make sure nothing was missed. He did not realize that the next time he chose preparation over listening, the words he used would create a wound that planning could not repair. The 8th day of Roland Everly's hospital stay began with Damon Hollander believing he had finally found the moment to make everything easier. Roland's condition had improved, and the conversations about leaving the hospital had become more practical. There were questions about daily routines, transportation, and what kind of support would be helpful after returning home. Damon believed those questions needed answers before they became problems. He had spent the previous night reviewing every possibility because uncertainty was the one thing he hated most when people he loved were involved. In business, preparation had protected him from mistakes. In his family, he believed it could do the same. That morning, Damon arrived earlier than Zola Everly expected. She noticed the folder in his hand before he even reached the room. "Damon," she said, looking at it, "what is that?" He placed it on the table beside Roland's chair. "A plan for after discharge." Roland looked up from the notes he had been reviewing. "A plan you made?" Damon nodded. "A plan we can discuss." Zola watched him carefully. She knew Damon was trying. She knew he was not coming into the room with anger or arrogance. But she also recognized the pattern they had discussed before. He had prepared an answer before everyone had finished explaining the question. Roland opened the folder and looked through the information. The pages were organized. The suggestions were reasonable. Damon had considered practical concerns and tried to reduce stress. Roland could see the effort. "You put time into this," Roland said. Damon nodded. "Because I care about both of you." Roland looked at the pages again. "I believe that." He turned to another section. "But some of these decisions have already been made." Damon shook his head. "They are recommendations." Recommendations from whom? Roland asked. Damon paused. From me. The answer was honest. That was what made the moment difficult. Damon was not pretending. He believed his judgment was valuable. He believed he was helping. Roland, Damon said, I know you want to keep doing things the way you always have. I respect that. But things change. Hold on, Oded. They do, Damon continued. And sometimes people do not recognize how much support they need until they are already overwhelmed. Zola stepped forward. Dad is not refusing support. Damon looked at her. I know. Then what are we deciding? She asked. Damon looked between them. I'm trying to prevent a situation where you end up carrying everything. Roland closed the folder. Zola and I can decide what she can carry. Damon felt the frustration building. Not because he disagreed with Roland, but because he was afraid. He had spent years protecting Zola from difficult situations. He had watched her put everyone else first. He imagined her trying to manage her father's needs while pretending she was fine. He imagined a future where everyone realized too late that they should have prepared earlier. That fear pushed him into the choice that changed everything. Before Roland had approved any plan, Damon had already contacted a support coordinator to ask about available options after discharge. He had not done it secretly. He had not intended to take control, but he had moved forward without waiting for Roland's decision. When Zola realized what he had done, her expression changed. You already contacted someone? She asked. Damon answered honestly, only to understand what was available. Roland looked at him. Before I chose? Damon opened his mouth, but the answer was obvious. I was trying to help. Hold on, no dead slowly. I know. The calmness of the response made Damon uncomfortable. Roland was not accusing him of being cruel. He was showing him the consequence of being certain he knew better. Sometimes, Roland said, people who love us can become so focused on protecting us that they stop seeing us. Damon looked away. He wanted to argue. He wanted to explain that he was trying to prevent hardship. Instead, he heard himself say the sentence that would stay with everyone in the room. Sometimes someone can become a burden without anyone intending it. The silence afterward felt heavier than any argument. Damon immediately regretted the words. He looked at Roland. That is not what I meant. Roland lowered his eyes for a moment. Then he looked back at Damon. I believe you. A pause followed. But it is still what you said. Zola felt the impact of those words. For days, she had defended Damon because she knew his intentions. She still knew them. But she also understood that intentions did not erase consequences. A person could love someone and still make them feel like a problem to solve. Damon looked at the folder, then at the man sitting in front of him. For the first time, he saw the difference between helping someone and managing them. He had spent so much time trying to prevent Roland from becoming dependent that he had failed to recognize the one thing Roland had never lost, his ability to decide. Later that afternoon, Damon apologized for the words. Roland listened, but he did not immediately tell him everything was fine. I know you did not mean to hurt me, Roland said, but I need you to understand that being hurt by someone's words does not disappear because they had good intentions. Damon accepted that. He had no defense that mattered anymore. The hospital room became quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence than before. The first silence came from shock. This one came from understanding that something important had changed. The family was still together. The love was still there, but the way they saw one another would not return to exactly what it had been before. The 9th day of Roland Everly's hospital stay began without the certainty that had defined the days before it. Damon Hollander arrived early, but this time he carried nothing in his hands. No folder, no prepared list, no solution waiting to be presented. Zola Everly noticed the difference immediately. She looked at him for a moment before speaking. You did not bring a plan today. Damon gave a small, tired smile. I thought maybe I should start by listening. Roland looked toward him from the chair beside the window. That would be a good change. Damon accepted the comment because he knew Roland was right. He sat down and allowed the conversation to begin with a question instead of an answer. What do you want the next few weeks to look like? Roland considered the question carefully. He did not answer with anger. He did not try to prove anything. He simply explained what mattered to him. He wanted help with the things that were genuinely difficult. He wanted to keep the routines that reminded him he was still himself. He wanted the people around him to understand that needing support did not mean losing control of his own life. Damon listened. He did not interrupt. He did not search for a better solution while Roland was speaking. It was harder than he expected. For years, Damon had built his success on making decisions quickly and confidently. Waiting had always felt like a risk. But sitting there, listening to Roland describe his own needs, Damon realized that waiting was sometimes the most respectful choice. I should have asked you this before I started making arrangements, Damon admitted. Roland did. Yes, you should have. The answer was honest, but not cruel. Damon accepted it. Later that morning, Roland spoke with the medical team about his next steps. He asked his own questions and made his own decisions. Zola stayed close, but she no longer reached for every answer before he could. Damon watched the interaction quietly. He noticed that Roland was not refusing help. He was choosing what kind of help belonged in his life. That difference had been there all along. Damon had simply been looking at the situation through his own fear. Before leaving the hospital, Damon asked Roland if they could speak privately. I want you to know something, Damon said. I understand now that I was not only trying to help. I was trying to remove uncertainty because I was afraid of what would happen if I could not. Roland istend, Damon continued. When I said that word, I made you feel like a problem instead of a person. I cannot undo that. Roland remained quiet for a moment. No, you cannot. Damon nodded. But I can make sure I do not repeat it. Roland looked at him carefully. That is what I need to see. It was not forgiveness in one sentence. It was not the old relationship returning instantly. It was a condition for rebuilding. When Roland was ready to leave the hospital, he packed his belongings himself. Zola offered help, and Roland accepted when he wanted it. Damon carried the heavier items, but waited for Roland to tell him what needed to be done. The difference was small, but everyone noticed it. Outside the hospital, the three of them walked together. There was no dramatic promise that everything would be perfect. There was no pretending that the painful moment had never happened. Zola still carried the memory of hearing her husband describe her father in a way that hurt. Roland still remembered the feeling of being seen as a responsibility instead of a person. Damon still had to prove that his understanding was deeper than an apology. But they were moving forward with a different agreement. That evening at home, Roland returned to the simple routine he had wanted to protect. He sat near the window with his book while Zola prepared dinner nearby. Damon entered the room and stopped before asking, "Do you need anything?" Roland looked up. "I will tell you if I do." Damon nodded. Fair enough. It was a small exchange, but it carried the weight of everything they had learned. Damon no longer measured love by how many problems he could solve before anyone asked. He began to understand that love was also the patience to let someone remain who they were. The apology had come after the hurt. It had come too late to prevent the words from changing the way Roland and Zola saw him. It had come too late to erase the moment when fear became more important than listening. But it had not come too late to begin rebuilding trust through actions instead of promises. Roland was not leaving the hospital as someone who needed to be rescued. He was leaving as someone whose voice had been respected. And for a family learning how to listen again, that was the first step toward finding their way back to one another. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.